It was just days before Christmas, a time when most people were busy picking up last-minute gifts, planning dinners, and preparing for the holidays. But for the Bletch family, the season was anything but joyful. Instead of gathering around a tree, they sat in a courtroom in Muskegon, facing the man responsible for their daughter's death. During the sentencing hearing, emotions were raw as the family delivered their victim impact statements. Then something shocking happened. The man on trial suddenly stood up, asked to be excused, and as he walked out, he turned and blew a kiss toward the grieving family. The room exploded with anger. People shouted at him, calling him names like coward and monster. The pain and fury in that courtroom made it clear. This wasn't just a case. It was a deep, personal tragedy that had torn a family apart. Just a week before Christmas, while most people were out shopping for gifts and preparing for holiday dinners, the Bletch family sat in a courtroom in Muskegon, Michigan. They were there for the sentencing of the man who had killed their daughter. But in a shocking moment during the victim impact statements, the man stood up, calmly asked to leave, and then turned and blew a kiss at the grieving family before walking out. The courtroom erupted. People shouted at him, calling him a coward, a monster. Sadly, this kind of behavior wasn't new for him. This man had taken more than one life. JessicaHeringa was one of those lives. She was a young mother, working hard to support her 3-year-old son. Living in Norton Shores, Michigan, she had recently picked up more shifts at the local Exxon gas station to help her family. Her boyfriend Dakota had lost his job, and even though their relationship wasn't perfect, Jessica was determined to hold things together. She had struggled with addiction in the past but was working to turn her life around. People who knew her described her as sweet, hardworking, and devoted to her child. Usually, Jessica worked during the day, but because of financial pressure, she agreed to take a night shift. On April 26, 2013, she went about her day like any other. That afternoon, she made a quick trip to the grocery store, then showed up for her shift at the gas station around 5 p.m., dressed in her uniform. Everything seemed normal, customers coming in and out, filling up their cars, grabbing snacks and drinks. But around closing time, something strange happened. A distressed customer called 911, reporting that no one was inside or outside the gas station. The lights were on, the doors were unlocked, and a car sat abandoned near the pump. It didn't look like a robbery. Nothing was broken or missing. It was like the clerk had just vanished. When police arrived, they quickly noticed some troubling signs. A woman's jacket, a purse with nearly $400 inside, and a pack of cigarettes had been left behind. It seemed like the clerk had no reason to leave in a hurry. Surveillance showed the last sale had been at 10:55 p.m., just minutes before the 911 call. Someone had bought a cigarette lighter. Outside, police spotted small red stains on the ground, drops that looked like blood. They also found a battery cover, possibly from a laser sight used on a firearm. Although robbery was considered, the untouched money ruled that out. Something violent had happened that night, and JessicaHeringa had disappeared without a trace. JessicaHeringa's disappearance quickly turned into a full-scale investigation. Once police identified the missing employee as 25-year-old Jessica, they realized they had a big problem on their hands. Not only had she vanished during her night shift, but the gas station where she worked didn't have any security cameras to offer clues. Jessica had been working alone that night, and now there was no footage to show what had happened. It was an unsettling situation, a young woman missing from her workplace with no eyewitnesses and no video evidence to help. Despite this, investigators pressed on. They began interviewing anyone who might have been nearby or noticed something strange. One person who came forward was the station manager. She told police that she and her husband had been riding their motorcycles past the gas station around 11 p.m. when they saw something that didn't feel right. A silver minivan had pulled behind the building, an odd move for a customer. Curious and slightly concerned, the manager slowed down and watched as a man got out of the van with the back hatch open. He didn't stay long before driving off. Since nothing seemed suspicious at the time, she and her husband didn't report it, unaware that Jessica would be reported missing just minutes later. More tips began to come in. Another witness, a man who had been in the area that night, said he saw a silver minivan parked at the gas station. He remembered a man talking to Jessica, being overly friendly, maybe even flirting with her. The witness also described the man as having wavy hair and wearing a red or orange sweatshirt. It matched the gas station manager's account almost exactly. Now police had not only a vehicle, but a description of someone who might have been the last person to see Jessica alive. What made JessicaHeringa's disappearance even more disturbing was something that had happened just one night before. A regular customer, who often stopped by the gas station, visited again on April 25th, the evening before Jessica went missing. She noticed a man standing unusually close to Jessica, engaging her in conversation. Concerned for Jessica's safety, the woman asked her why she was working the night shift alone. It just didn't seem safe. But before Jessica could respond, the strange man spoke up instead. "She's got her customers looking out for her," he said. The tone of his voice and his odd confidence made the woman uneasy. When she looked at Jessica, she noticed the young woman silently shaking her head. Her body language hinted at fear. Trusting her instincts, the woman decided to stay in her car and keep watch until Jessica finished her shift and safely left. She also made sure the man left too. That moment would stick with her. The woman later gave police a description of the man: wavy hair, orange or red sweatshirt, the same one provided earlier by the gas station manager and another witness. With consistent descriptions from 3 different people, the police were finally able to create a composite sketch. They made the sketch public and held press conferences, urging anyone with information to come forward. But even with all this effort, the case slowly faded from the public's eye. No new tips came in, and Jessica, a devoted young mother, was still missing. The investigation grew cold. Then more than a year later, on June 29, 2014, tragedy struck again. In Dalton Township, Michigan, a 36-year-old woman named RebeccaBletch was found shot to death near her home. She had been out for a jog when she was attacked. The shocking murder sent a fresh wave of fear through the community. Once again, it was a woman targeted while alone. And once again, the crime went unsolved. Shell casings were discovered near Rebecca's body, and bullet fragments were recovered during the autopsy. But there were no clear leads. With Rebecca's death and Jessica's unsolved disappearance still fresh in everyone's minds, it felt like history was repeating itself, and the community was growing terrified. But it wouldn't stop there. Nearly 2 years after Rebecca's murder, the man responsible would strike again. But this time, he picked the wrong victim. On April 16, 2016, a teenage girl from Laketown Township got lost after leaving a party late at night. While trying to find her way, she was approached by a man in a silver minivan. He offered to let her use his phone. When she agreed, he told her to get into the van to make the call. She hesitated but eventually got in. That's when everything changed. As soon as she sat down, the man locked the doors and pulled a gun. The girl instantly realized the danger she was in. Panic rose in her chest, but so did her will to survive. Thinking quickly, she asked the man to roll down the window so she could get some air. The moment he did, she made her move. In a burst of strength and courage, the girl pushed herself through the open window and tumbled out of the moving van. She ran as fast as she could, not looking back. And that brave escape, it would be the beginning of the end for the man who had evaded justice for years. Though shaken and bruised, the brave teenage girl survived. And that decision to leap from a moving van would help bring down a predator. She gave police a description of the van and, crucially, the man behind the wheel. Authorities quickly identified him as Jeffrey Wills, and what they learned next was chilling. Willis wasn't just some random guy with a van. He had already done time for homicide. That revelation alone was alarming, but detectives were just getting started. Acting fast, they searched Jeffrey's silver minivan, and what they uncovered was straight out of a nightmare. Inside, they found a firearm, its serial number intentionally scratched off, and the battery cover for its laser sight was missing. Also discovered, several syringes filled with a clear liquid, which toxicology would later identify as a strong sedative. Alongside those, they found restraints, zip ties, and other disturbing tools. It was clear. This van had been custom-equipped for abduction. Had that teenage girl not escaped, there's no telling what could have happened to her. The firearm proved to be a key piece of evidence. After restoring the serial number, investigators traced it back to a woman who had previously reported her gun stolen. She wasn't just anyone. She was one of Jeffrey's former co-workers. Her weapon had a laser sight, matching the part found in the van. Everything was starting to click. A man with a known record, an unregistered weapon, and a van packed with tools for abduction. Add in the silver minivan seen in previous witness reports, and it was more than suspicion. It was becoming a solid case. By September 2016, more than 3 years after JessicaHeringa vanished, and over 4 years since RebeccaBletch was murdered, detectives secured a warrant and searched Willis's home and vehicle. What they found inside his house was worse than they feared. Jeffrey Willis, it turned out, wasn't just a predator. He was obsessed. On his computer, investigators found volumes of disturbing material, violent, graphic content targeting women and minors. But one discovery stood out more than the rest. On the desktop was a folder labeled VIX. Inside it, 2 subfolders, ominously titled JLH and RSB. For detectives, the initials sent an immediate chill down their spines. JLH matched Jessica Lynn Heringa. RSB, that would be Rebecca Sue Bletch. These weren't random files. They were trophies. The digital trail was damning. The subfolders labeled JLH and RSB weren't just cold storage, they were shrines. Inside were photos of both Jessica Lynn Heringa and Rebecca Sue Bletch, along with news articles chronicling their disappearance and death. It was as if Jeffrey Willis had been documenting his own crimes, reliving them from the shadows of his darkened room. But the most horrifying piece of digital evidence came in the form of a password. One of Jeffrey's computers was locked. Investigators cracked the code, and what they found was chilling. J4L27H13. Jessica's initials. The exact date she vanished. April 26, 2013. It was almost as if Jeffrey had memorialized her disappearance in his password. That kind of detail left no room for coincidence, and the nightmare didn't end there. A firearm was recovered from Jeffrey's home, and it proved to be the murder weapon. Ballistics confirmed that the shell casings found near Rebecca's body matched it exactly. This was the final nail. With all this damning evidence, the van, the weapon, the folders, the attempted abduction, and his disturbing computer archives, Jeffrey Willis was arrested. He was charged with the kidnapping and murder of JessicaHeringa, the murder of RebeccaBletch, the attempted kidnapping of the teenage girl who'd miraculously escaped. And he was even named a suspect in a 1996 cold case involving a Fruitport High School student. Authorities also discovered that Willis had visited the Exxon gas station where Jessica worked over 15 times prior to her disappearance. He had clearly been watching her, planning, and on the night of April 26, 2013, he finally struck. Jessica's fate was sealed the moment she was left alone that night, but no one knew the full truth until a brave teenager outsmarted her would-be attacker and lived to tell. More damning signs surfaced as the net closed in on Jeffrey Willis. His co-workers, once unsuspecting, came forward with disturbing observations. The day after Jessica vanished, they'd noticed deep scratches on his face and arms, like someone had fought him hard. And the digital breadcrumbs only deepened suspicions. Jeffrey's phone records placed him at a remote property, just 15 minutes from the gas station, around 11:30 p.m., precisely when Jessica disappeared. That property? It had once belonged to his grandfather. Now it was his. When investigators searched the location, they didn't find Jessica. But they did find something almost as telling. Bleach, cleaning products, and chemical traces. Clear signs that someone had cleaned up a crime scene. With overwhelming evidence in hand, both physical and digital, the prosecution moved forward. In May 2018, Jeffrey Willis stood trial for the kidnapping and murder of JessicaHeringa, despite her body still missing. It was one of those rare cases where the evidence spoke so loudly a conviction didn't need a body. The courtroom saw a relentless stream of proof. Forensic data from his computers, the recovered firearms, surveillance matches, the composite sketch, phone pings, witness accounts, the VIX folder, and the emotional testimonies painted a dark picture. Jeffrey had stalked Jessica, visiting the gas station at least 15 times. On April 26th, he waited for the moment she was alone. and he struck. The prosecution laid out the chilling sequence. Jessica was lured into the minivan. She resisted, fought, injured him, but he overpowered her. He assaulted her, and he killed her. And then, as if nothing happened, he moved on with his life. It took the jury just 90 minutes to reach their verdict. Guilty. Life in prison, no chance of parole. He had already been sentenced to life in December 2017 for RebeccaBletch's murder, but now he was being held fully accountable for JessicaHeringa's disappearance. Still, for all the justice served, one unbearable piece remained missing. Jessica's body was never found. The evidence made it clear she was gone. But for Jessica's family, for her son, for the community, closure was still just out of reach. They couldn't lay her to rest. They couldn't say goodbye. And that's the part that lingers, haunts. JefferyWills sits behind bars, a man who hunted women in plain sight, a predator whose ego left digital trophies. But even now, somewhere in Michigan, the remains of JessicaHeringa are still waiting to come home. I didn't even know something like this was allowed, but the judge let it happen. Jeffrey walked out in the middle of Rebecca's family reading their victim impact statements, and as if to add one final insult, he turned and blew a kiss to Jessica's family on his way out. It was a moment of such pure evil, so calculated and smug, that it etched itself into the memory of everyone in that courtroom. But the families didn't crumble. They fought back. Rebecca's family pushed for a change that would never let something like this happen again. Their determination led to the creation of RebeccaBletch's Law, a bill requiring defendants to remain present during all victim impact statements, no exceptions. They believed if a family had the courage to stand up and share their pain, the person responsible should have to hear every word. The bill passed the Michigan Senate on May 10, 2018, and was officially signed into law by Governor Rick Snyder on May 24, 2018. But Jessica's family wasn't done either. They were horrified to learn that the gas station where Jessica worked, a reputable, busy location, had no security cameras at all. Worse still, Jessica was working the night shift alone, completely vulnerable. They firmly believed that if there had been even one more person there with her, Jeffrey might have never had the chance. A predator like him looks for moments like this: isolation, darkness, opportunity. And Jessica paid the ultimate price. In response, her loved ones pushed for legislation of their own. The JessicaHeringa Act, a law aimed at increasing workplace safety standards, including requirements for surveillance systems and multiple employees on shift during vulnerable hours. Because what happened to Jessica should never happen to anyone again. Just when the horror seemed complete, the story took another dark turn. In 2016, the name Kevin Blum entered the case. JefferyWills' own cousin and a former Michigan Department of Corrections prison guard. At first glance, Kevin seemed disconnected from the carnage. But soon he became the key to uncovering the final, buried truth. Kevin was charged with lying to police after authorities realized he knew details about Jessica's disappearance. Details that had never been made public. Initially, he pleaded guilty, but later shifted to a no-contest plea to being an accessory after the fact. And then, he confessed. Kevin revealed that it was Jeffrey who had killed Jessica, but he had helped cover it up. On the morning after Jessica vanished, Kevin said Jeffrey called him over, saying there was a party. But when Kevin arrived, there was no celebration, just silence and dread. On the floor, he saw Jessica, unconscious, stripped, bound, a head wound. Kevin claimed he panicked, but not enough to call for help. Instead, he helped wrap Jessica in a sheet and load her into a car. Then the cousins drove out to a remote stretch near Sheridan and Laketon Road, where Jeffrey had already dug a grave. They buried her there, left her in the cold earth, and drove away. No remorse, no hesitation. This horrifying revelation confirmed what Jessica's family had feared, but never wanted to believe. And it painted Jeffrey not just as a predator, but as a methodical, calculated monster, willing to bring his own blood into the darkness. And even after all this, the trial, the testimonies, the confessions, Jeffrey still showed no trace of humanity. During the victim impact statements, a time when grieving families are given the rare chance to speak directly to the person who tore their world apart, Most offenders sit and listen. Some cry, some apologize, some feel the weight, but not Jeffrey. As RebeccaBletch's family poured out their pain, this man, this heartless creature, stood up and walked out of the courtroom. No words, no glance, no apology. Just walked out like their grief wasn't worth his time. I didn't even know something like this was allowed, but the judge let it happen. Jeffrey walked out in the middle of Rebecca's family, reading their victim impact statements, and as if to add one final insult, he turned and blew a kiss to Jessica's family on his way out. It was a moment of such pure evil, so calculated and smug, that it etched itself into the memory of everyone in that courtroom. But the families didn't crumble. They fought back. Rebecca's family pushed for a change that would never let something like this happen again. Their determination led to the creation of RebeccaBletch's Law, a bill requiring defendants to remain present during all victim impact statements, no exceptions. They believed if a family had the courage to stand up and share their pain, the person responsible should have to hear every word. The bill passed the Michigan Senate on May 10, 2018, and was officially signed into law by Governor Rick Snyder on May 24, 2018. But Jessica's family wasn't done either. They were horrified to learn that the gas station where Jessica worked, a reputable, busy location, had no security cameras at all. Worse still, Jessica was working the night shift alone, completely vulnerable. They firmly believed that if there had been even one more person there with her, Jeffrey might have never had the chance. A predator like him looks for moments like this: isolation, darkness, opportunity. And Jessica paid the ultimate price. In response, her loved ones pushed for legislation of their own. The JessicaHeringa Act, a law aimed at increasing workplace safety standards, including requirements for surveillance systems and multiple employees on shift during vulnerable hours. Because what happened to Jessica should never happen to anyone again. The JessicaHeringa Act was introduced on December 9, 2013, shortly after her disappearance shook an entire community to its core. It was backed by Jessica's family, local advocates, and state representatives who believe that no one should ever be left vulnerable at their workplace, especially during the late hours of the night. The bill was clear. Every gas station and 24/7 store must have a working, secure surveillance system. No shift worker should ever be left alone. 2 employees minimum at all times. This wasn't a demand born out of politics. It was born out of pain. It was about protecting young women like Jessica, who simply went to work, never knowing a predator was watching. But here's the gut-wrenching part. More than a decade later, the bill still hasn't passed into law. 12 years. 12 years of waiting. 12 years of families begging the state to put safety above cost. The bill keeps stalling in legislation. Why? Because of money. Because requiring security cameras and adequate staffing apparently costs too much. Let that sink in. Jessica's life, her safety, her future, wasn't worth the price of a second employee or a working camera. And 12 years later, the same system still fails to protect others like her. So the question stands, how many more Jessicas have to vanish before we decide that safety isn't optional? How many more Rebeccas have to suffer before courts make killers face their impact? The families did everything they could. They turned tragedy into action, grief into change, and silence into law, or at least they tried to. But it's not over, because even if Jessica never comes home, and even if Rebecca's killer never shows remorse, their names have sparked a movement, a push to make sure that no other family is left with only memories, questions, and bills that never pass. This wasn't just another case. This was Jessica Lynn Heringa, a woman, a mother, a daughter, a human being whose life was stolen and never returned. Even with JefferyWills locked away forever, her family remains haunted, not by what they know, but by what they still don't. Where is Jessica? Why won't he tell them? And that's the sickest part of all, power through silence. Jeffrey knows what happened, and even in a cold prison cell, he still has the ability to hurt those he's already broken, to withhold closure, to dangle answers they may never get. All the while, lawmakers debate whether safety is too expensive. Tell that to Jessica's son, Zevin, who had to grow up without his mother. Tell that to her sister, Samantha, who stepped in when everything was falling apart. Tell that to the countless women working alone tonight behind gas station counters, hoping someone sees them as people, not as a liability. Jessica deserved more, Rebecca deserved more, and we can do better.